My name is Candace Augustine. I'm an attorney here with Rudman. I've been here for about a year, but I've been practicing for 12 years, almost exclusively in estate planning with a focus on elder law planning. Elder law planning is a facet of estate planning that deals with retirement, post-retirement, and asset protection, which is a little different than if you're trying to plan when you're, in your 40s and 50s. So the first thing I want to do before I dive into my slides, which Karen's going to put up for us, is I want to explain a little bit of nomenclature. You'll hear me talk a little bit about ill spouse versus community spouse. And I just want to define for you that the ill spouse, when I'm talking about an ill spouse, I'm talking about the person for whom MaineCare services are being sought. They are the person likely in the nursing home or who needs nursing care. The community spouse is the spouse who's still at home, still in the community. I also talk very fast. And so if I talk very fast and you need me to slow down, please just raise your hand. Learning goals. So my hope today when we walk away from this seminar is that you're going to understand what it takes to qualify for MaineCare. You're going to understand what MaineCare does and doesn't do. And you're going to have some general ideas to what our strategies look like for asset protection planning. I will define for you what proactive planning versus crisis planning means. But on the outset, proactive planning means that you are at least 5 years out from any potential need for nursing home care. I mean, how do we anticipate that? We kind of go based on where you are in life. If you are on the verge of retirement or you have just retired and you're in a position where you don't anticipate your assets and your wealth to significantly grow, you're not still contributing to your assets, you're not still contributing to your growth, then that's when we're talking about proactive planning. Crisis planning means that the need for MaineCare is imminent. So we're within a very small window, a couple months to a month sometimes. When we're looking at proactive planning, the planning that we're looking at is more how to preserve assets. Whereas when we're looking at crisis planning, our planning goal is more about how to get someone qualified. So MaineCare is a broadly used term in the state of Maine, and it is kind of our umbrella term for all of our Medicaid services. Medicaid services are benefits you have to qualify for, whereas like for Medicare, you get them because you paid into the system and you reached a certain age. Medicaid, you have to qualify for because you have a need, financial, medical, usually both. In Maine, we have 3 different levels of MaineCare services. The first level is our assisted living level. That means that you have a minimal need for care. You could get by yourself, but there are some things that you can't do entirely on your own. It's not entirely safe for you to do those things on your own. And so we do have assisted living facilities within nursing homes where you can receive that care. The next level is residential. It's a step up from assisted living. It means you need a little bit more than a little bit of help. It's a moderate level of help. And then the highest level of care, we actually break into 2 separate branches. We have skilled level care, which just means that you are significantly deficient in exercising independently a large number of your activities of daily living. The other branch is memory care. If you have advanced significantly into dementia or Alzheimer's or some other kind of dementia-like illness where you can't function independently safely, then you would qualify for skilled level care under the memory care. We also, I bulleted down their home-based waiver program because I just wanted to bring attention to this. MaineCare in the nursing home doesn't necessarily mean you have to be in the nursing home. We actually have a program that we call the home-based waiver program where you can receive nursing home services at home. MaineCare will pay a provider to come into your home and provide those services for you. It is capped at a certain amount. You do you cap out at about 40 hours per week of nursing home care. So it's a really good program for people who live in a more urban area, which I know in Maine is really hard to find a more urban area, but think high population relative to like Bangor or Herman or those kinds of areas. The more rural you live, the harder it is to find people who can provide that service for you. Think also people who have other family members who can step in and provide support where the home-based program does not cover support, because like I said, it caps at 40 hours a week. So you want to be able to have other family members who can come in and assist. But it's a really great program, and it's available to everybody. And the state really wants to encourage people to use that program more than entering the nursing home. Variety of reasons. The nursing home, obviously, we have capacity limits in a nursing home. They can only take so many. We want to try to reduce the number of people in a nursing home as well, because nursing homes are more expensive. MaineCare has to pay more for people in the nursing home. And also to encourage people to apply for this program if they're eligible for it. MaineCare actually allows the people to keep more in assets than if they're applying for nursing home care. So how do we qualify for MaineCare? I'm giving this information to you because I want you to understand what it takes to go into a MaineCare plan. Go back one. Sorry, it's okay. Karen's ahead of me. We have to qualify on two different branches, on two different levels. First, we have to qualify financially, and then we have to qualify medically. Financially, we break finances up into two different categories. We have exempt categories and we have non-exempt categories. Exempt categories are assets that you are allowed to keep and still qualify for MaineCare. So for an exempt, what falls under exempt category, and it's a very limited list, is your home. You can have a home with equity value of up to about $900,000, and that will be exempt. That also includes any adjacent land that you have that might be like on a separate deed or might be identified separately by the town, as long as it is adjacent, contiguous to your land, and it was intended to be part of your primary residence. So, say you bought a strip of land, on a side of your property because, you needed it for something, or you just wanted to keep your neighbors that farther away from you. As long as you intended to keep it as your primary residence, it would still qualify. The ill spouse in the facility is allowed to have $10,000 in liquid assets. So $2,000 in a bank account and about $8,000 in some kind of interest-bearing account. For the sake of making sure people don't ever go over that $10,000 limit, we do encourage people to be closer to like $9,000. Because if you go over $10,000, you could be disqualified from MaineCare if you don't cure that problem. You can have a whole life insurance policy with a cash value of $1,500. Sometimes we have to borrow against whole life policies to get the cash value down. So the face value is really not as important. It's the cash value that's important because you can borrow against that. You can have a mortuary trust worth $12,000. Mortuary trusts, I will caution everybody about mortuary trusts. It's very easy to overinvest in those. And any amount of money in the mortuary trust over $12,000 counts towards your $10,000 asset allowance. So you just want to be careful about how you invest in those. The couple, so you're married, as a married couple, you can have one vehicle. You can also have an additional vehicle if that additional vehicle serves a specific purpose. For example, one of you has a disability and your van is disability accessible. That is a reason why they would exclude the second vehicle, but typically you get one vehicle. You can also prepay any services that you need to, like your burial plan. And then the community spouse, if you're married, your community spouse can have an additional $130,380 in the community. So combined, the two spouses can have a home, $140,380, life insurance policy, mortuary trust, and vehicle. And by the way, the mortuary trust is each spouse gets one. So it's not, you're not capped at a combined 12,000, it's 12,000 each. Non-exempt assets is everything else. So anything above that 140,380 is non-exempt, and we have to plan for it. Okay, Karen. Oh, we're having a slide malfunction. There we go. Okay. So the second branch we have to worry about qualification for is the medical branch. This is not something that we can actually plan for. You have to just be medically qualified. So when you make your MaineCare application, MaineCare will send somebody from a company called Maximus to visit the ill spouse, and they will do an assessment of whether or not they qualify and what level of services they do qualify for. They're the ones who tell us whether a person is assisted living, rehab, or skilled. They'll make a determination of a person's mental capabilities, but they'll also determine whether or not they meet these 5 activities of daily living. There's more like 13, but we really only worry about the big 5. So mobility, can you walk around? Can you stand up or sit down or get out of bed by yourself? Do you need assistance? How much assistance do you need? Eating, can you feed yourself? But also, are you safe in a kitchen environment? Not can you cook a 7-course meal, because I can't do that, but are you safe? Are you going to leave the stove on? Are you going to leave the, the tea kettle on? Are you going to do things that are dangerous for you? Bathing, can you wash yourself? But also, are you safe in a bathtub? Are you a slip and fall risk? Are you gonna, hurt yourself in the bath? Dressing, can you dress independently? And that doesn't necessarily mean that somebody picks your clothes out for you is a problem, but if they do pick your clothes out for you, do you know how to put them on in the right order? Or are you going to not know how to do that? And then the last one is toileting. This one is the one that embarrasses most people, but it's, can you use the restroom independently? And or are you having problems with restroom? So are you incontinent? Are you having accidents? That kind of stuff. The next slide, I just wanted to draw your attention to. Our office has put together a checklist, because this is all the documentation that you need to provide MaineCare when you make a MaineCare application. You have to support your application with proof that you qualify financially. First, you have to provide them with demographic information, birth certificates, social security cards, identification cards, health insurance cards. Sometimes if you've been married multiple times, they'll want to see a marriage certificate. Sometimes if you've been divorced a lot of times, they'll want to see divorce decrees. Not always, but sometimes. So we do look at demographics. They ask about your high school education levels and if you're a foreign citizen and things like that, because they really want to try to figure out under what level of care you qualify. And then they also look at your finances. Maine has what's called a look back period. That look back period is 60 months. Karen's playing with the slides again.
It's very temperamental.
We're having technology issues. So that look back period is 60 months. And what that means is that MaineCare can look back within the last 60 months of your life and determine whether or not you did anything with your assets that you should not have done in their eyes. So the first thing that we give them is the last 12 months of any statements for bank accounts, investment accounts, life insurance, anything you've owned in the last 12 months. And then we give them 4 additional statements. We pick the month of application for the previous 4 years. And that gives them kind of a global picture of what your last 5 years have looked like financially. If when they're going through those documents, they see something that raises for them a red flag, they may ask for all the other documentation that we hadn't already provided. So you're going to want to prepare yourself to have that information available, even if it's not something that you immediately provide. You have 45 days from the date of application to get them all this information. So it's not something that you really want to stall on. And it can be a little expensive to get bank statements from the bank if you don't keep those. So I screenshotted what the top half of the MaineCare application looks like for you, because I just wanted, to give you an idea as to what it looks like. But I was going to talk really quickly about why we're doing all this. Why do we make these applications? Why do we worry about trying to preserve our assets? And really, the biggest question that I get from people is, how do I stop MaineCare from taking my assets if I get sick? MaineCare has a program called Estate Recovery. And I'm sure some of you have probably heard of that. Estate Recovery is the program through which MaineCare can recoup what it spent on you by filing a lien against your estate and claiming your assets. So when you pass away, if you still own your home, if you're not married, and you still have $10,000 in your name, MaineCare will file a lien against your assets to pay itself back. If you're still married, there are some exceptions to what MaineCare can and can't claim. For example, if the home is jointly owned, they'll leave it alone. Even if the home is not jointly owned, if your surviving spouse still lives in it, they're not going to kick your surviving spouse out of the house, but they will eventually file that lien. This is a really big deal. If you've got family land, if you've got, if the house you're living in has been passed down through generations, you don't necessarily want it going to the state of Maine if you've got kids who could have it and carry on your legacies. And so we worry about estate recovery. We plan for estate recovery. So when people come to me because they want to do asset protection planning, these are the big things that I look for. I will ask you, have you made really big gifts in the last 5 years? And I'm really looking for honesty when I ask this question. And when I'm talking about big gifts, I'm talking about a couple $1,000s and over. It might not seem to you like a big gift or a big question to answer because you're thinking, oh, you know, it's Christmas presents and birthday presents, or I bought my grandson a $5,000 car. And to you, those might not be huge gifts, but for MaineCare, those are big gifts. And it's important that you tell me because I put a lot of time and effort into creating the plan that we put in place for you. And if we create this plan and we start implementing this plan, and then you tell me, oh, I gave $50,000 to my daughter for a down payment on her house 3 years ago, I now have to redo everything. And it could affect whether or not a person can qualify for services. We're not judging you. I have no problem with how you spent your money in the last 5 years. I just have to plan for it. So please, if an elder law attorney asks you the question, be honest. I also look at income versus the anticipated cost of care in the facility, because sometimes the plan we put in place will use the income as a factor. And I think the most important thing I look for is I take a look at your estate plan and I'm looking for a really comprehensive financial power of attorney. We want to see that there's the power in your power of attorney to make gifts of your assets. Because if you in the planning process can no longer plan, your agent needs to carry that on for you. Or if you don't plan far enough in advance, your agent needs to be able to pick up the ball and plan for you. And if there's no gifting power, we are essentially stuck. There's not much we can do without a gifting power. So that power is the first thing I look for. Next, I would like to see that your agent can make a trust using your assets for your benefit. That is a huge planning tool that we use to help set money aside and preserve assets. So that's a power that we really like to see in there. In Maine, powers of attorney are durable, which means that if you lose your ability to make decisions and handle your affairs, your agent or your power of attorney is still effective. In some states, that presumption does not exist. Powers of attorney have to be stated as durable. So I do look to see if the document is durable. And then the last one sounds really evil, but it's our legal term for your agent being able to make gifts of your assets to themselves. And this is an important power if your agent is your child, because sometimes your child is the best person to receive the gifts. And so we want your agent to be able to gift things to themselves to plan better for you. So we approach our MaineCare planning strategies in 2 different ways. First, we look proactively. When we're looking proactively, our biggest concern is estate recovery. How do we protect what you have now so that if you end up in the nursing home, the state can't touch your stuff, right? The pros to proactive planning, you have far more control. You can save much more of your assets. You essentially can pick and choose what you save and don't save because you're outside the 60-month look back period. In a perfect world, you're outside the 60-month look back period. So you could essentially save everything if you wanted to. You're much more involved in your long-term care plan because you're setting out the rules for how you're going to be cared for if and when you lose capacity. And you can feel confident that you did the best you could to protect your assets for your future generations. The biggest con in this process is that in order to protect the assets in the best way possible, you are losing some flexibility with how those assets are then used. And you do have to surrender significant ownership rights. You still receive the benefit of your assets, you just don't own your assets. When we look at the other side of that coin, we're talking about crisis planning. Remember I said earlier that crisis planning means that MaineCare is imminent. It is within the next couple of months. So the pros for crisis planning, well, first, what we're worried about in crisis planning is we're worried about getting you qualified. Estate recovery is a secondary concern. And obviously it's something that we're worried about, but we're much more worried about getting you qualified. So the pros there, we can get you qualified usually fairly quickly within a couple of months if needed. Sometimes within a couple of weeks if things look good. We can save some of the assets usually, not all. In a lot of scenarios, we can save roughly half, which is much better than the alternative, because the alternative to being able to save at least half is that you have to spend it all to get yourself qualified. And that's just, giving money away, essentially. Money that could have been used for your care otherwise. The con to crisis planning, you have less control over your plan. You're not kind of handing the ball to your agent and other generations to make sure you're cared for the way you need to be cared for. You're not protecting those maybe legacy assets that you have, like the inherited camp, the way that you would have done it if you'd had the opportunity. And the biggest con to crisis planning is that if you don't have a proper estate plan in place, if you don't have that financial power of attorney with gifting powers in it, we essentially can't do much anything. The only answer at that point is to spend the money. I kind of already talked about this a little bit, but so for proactive planning, a lot of the time what we're doing is we have a gifting strategy put in place. We've created trusts to hold assets. And we do a really exhaustive and comprehensive estate plan so that we are putting assets in the place they need to be, changing beneficiaries on assets so that they're funded in the places they need to be. It's really, we really get into like virtually every aspect of your financial picture so that we can make sure you're as well protected as you need to be. On the crisis side, our strategies, the strategy that we hopefully have to do the least often because it's the least effective is to spend the money. We're not preserving assets in that case, we're really just getting you qualified. The next one is kind of funny sounding, and there's a whole history to it that maybe one day I'll write a blog about, but it's called reverse half a loaf planning. And essentially what that is we will give your assets to a family member or to a trust, and then and then MaineCare will tell you, okay, you gave assets away, so you don't qualify for MaineCare anymore for say 10 months, for example. You'll still be in the nursing home, and you'll every month spend down that penalty because you're there and you're getting services. And then the person who received the money or the trust who received the money will also pay for your care. And so what you're essentially doing is cutting the penalty in half. It's not always exactly in half, but it's close. So roughly half of the money stays in the trust because you were able to preserve half, you've served half the penalty, and now you qualify for MaineCare. The last strategy is it's actually a tool that we have been given express permission to create. It is in our regulation manual for MaineCare applications. We can create what's called a MaineCare compliant annuity, and we can take assets that are non-exempt and turn them into an income stream. If I have an annuity, or I have an IRA, for example, and I want to turn it into an annuity to get myself qualified for MaineCare, I can do that and still have the income go to my husband. So it's a way of transferring non-exempt assets to your community spouse as well. You get a full return on the money, less, annuity fees. So it's a way of kind of moving assets back and forth that otherwise you would have been forced to spend.